the magic and the special connection that happens when two people get together. Like even us right now talking, I mean, I'm not going to have the same conversation with anybody because we're cueing off each other and, it's unique. And in therapy, there's unique growth, magical moments and healing that happens that's really special to that therapeutic relationship.
Okay, Pat, welcome to the show. So to get started, most people see sensorimotor psychotherapy as an intervention for trauma. But from doing a bit of research for this interview, I discovered that you actually started out working focused on attachment. So I wanted to ask, how did that influence your own perspective, and how did that influence the later development of sensorimotor psychotherapy?
Okay. Yeah. Well, when I started in the 70s, nobody was really talking about attachment. But what I was working with was the imprint of early childhood relationships, which is attachment, especially with, caregivers and parents. And that was my primary focus, working with the belief systems and how those early attachment relationships really set a trajectory for development and for later relationships. Um, so that's my foundation. Sensorimotor psychotherapy is very relational. And of course, the attachment wounds show up in the therapeutic relationship as well. So that was my focus really until the late 70s when I was referred sexual abuse survivors from the university here in Boulder. And then I started getting interested in trauma and the overlay between trauma and attachment. But even with the work with trauma, um, I mean, our work is a relationally focused, some people say attachment focused therapy. So the attachment elements and those relation elements are always primary in sensorimotor psychotherapy.
It's really interesting. And I'm aware that in some of your early work, you were working with people that were having, I think it was women that were having sexual difficulties, and nothing was working. And then you made a decision that you weren't going to focus on the level of emotions and beliefs, and instead you were going to focus on the body. So at the time, that would have been quite radical. So I'm just curious, how did you come to that realization, and what were the implications of that later on in your career?
That's a great question. And it really speaks to attachment because when we're resolving attachment issues, we are working with what John Bowlby called, he talked about the most intense emotions are developed in the formation, the disruption, and the reconnecting of attachment relationships. And then, through those attachment relationships and how we're handled and treated, I mean, even before language, we develop patterns in the body and belief systems that go along with those patterns. So that's what I was working with. I was working with strong emotions related to attachment relationships and the beliefs that that were running clients' lives and how that affected their bodies. Like beliefs like I'm not good enough, maybe pulling in, and um, but then when I started working with these sexual abuse survivors who they came because of sexual dysfunction and not being able to enjoy sexuality, those interventions didn't work. Going back into the strong emotion made things worse for these clients. And the beliefs always seem to get back to something like I'm not safe, the world's not safe, people are going to hurt me. And those were all trauma related beliefs that can't really be resolved in the same way as an attachment related belief, like I'm not good enough. Um, so It was one of the most challenging times of my career, actually, because nothing I had been taught was effective with these clients, and nobody was talking about how to deal with trauma in like 1978, I think it was. So I made a decision. Well, it wasn't working, so I thought, well, I'm just going to slow down and see if I can help them just stay connected with their bodies, you know. And that was the beginning of sensory psychotherapy work with trauma. Um, and the clients, at least they stopped getting worse and, gradually started getting better. But I do think that we can do harm if we don't understand that working with attachment related emotions when the dysregulation of trauma is what is so immediate in the psychotherapy session, it can do harm. Clients can go into a catharsis, but it just makes the dysregulation worse. So that's what I learned.
So are we sort of saying here that the emotions, the beliefs and everything, they're kind of a layer on top of the underlying nervous system. So if we work at the level of the nervous system and the body, we're maybe getting at a deeper layer and maybe tackling things at the core rather than more surface layers. Is that right ballpark?
Well, I wouldn't talk about it in terms of surface and depth, because the attachment related issues also they really impact the body and the emotions and the nervous system. Um, so I wouldn't say we're going deeper when we're working with, the physiology and the body with trauma, but I would say with trauma work, trauma first and foremost affects the body, the physiology, and the instinctive defenses. So we're going directly for the body, that bottom-up processing with trauma, and distinguishing between trauma-related emotions like terror and rage. Pierre Genet called them vehement emotions. And this is the main learning. Genet said, if you try to process those emotions, they're just circular. You can't resolve them. And that's what I was finding out, because I was treating them like an attachment related emotion, which you do resolve by going into. Like if somebody has if they have pain of not being seen by their attachment figures as being good enough, that's really painful. And you can cry and process that emotion, and it starts to resolve. But I believe with the vehement emotions, working with them on a somatic level is much more effective. In fact, I think it's anti-therapeutic to go into the panic and the extreme rage, uh, that are connected with instinctive defensive responses. Does that make sense?
I think it does. And it maybe links with something else I wanted to ask you about. You worked in a psychiatric hospital, and one of the things you were doing there is you were teaching yoga and dance. And, to me, that strikes me back then, especially, that's quite a revolutionary way to help people heal. Why do you think these experiences help people to heal?
Well, I mean, in retrospect, I didn't know any of this at the time. I was just really interested in dance and yoga. Uh, and at that time in the 70s, I mean, I was a technician in the hospital. I didn't have any training at that time. It's the early 70s. But they let me do whatever I wanted. I mean, I was leading art therapy groups, group processing, yoga, dance, and it was great learning. You couldn't do that these days. You know, but what I really think was happening was what I think most of these patients had trauma, although it was never talked about. And I think when they did the yoga classes were very slow, and they were very just calm, and patients could leave as they wanted. They could come in, they could go away. They had complete control over their participation. And I think it was that it stimulated the dorsal vagal system that's associated with a feign death shutdown response. Only with the yoga classes, they had control, and it was without the fear. And I think that that was healing. And then the dance classes back then, they were just, they weren't anything fancy. They were just fast, upbeat line dances where people learned simple steps, and it was really upbeat. And that stimulates your sympathetic system, but also without the fear. And the patients had control and choice. They could come in and go out, and so I think that helped recalibrate the nervous systems. I really do.
So essentially, these experiences help these people to move through these different states of the nervous system, but with a sense of control and without the fear and the panic. And that can be very, wow, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because for a trauma survivor, like that dorsal vagal tone, when that tone is up, it just relaxes us, and it makes us feel we need it, like to go to sleep or for meditative states. But for a trauma survivor, that relaxed state is often connected with the shutdown. So it's coupled with fear, which I think is why so many clients I've worked with, traumatized clients, they have trouble going to sleep at night, they have trouble relaxing, because it implicitly is associated with fear. And the same with the sympathetic arousal, that's associated with fight or flight or cry for help. Um, so experience it without the fear, I think, can be very healing. But that's just my ideas. I wasn't thinking any of that at the time.
No, that is a light bulb moment for me. Anyway, that I think that's quite a significant sort of discovery to make. Now, but for anybody that isn't aware, I'm sure you're probably tired giving this answer because you've probably given it a thousand times. But I do have to ask because people will be listening to this that aren't familiar with sensorimotor psychotherapy. So, for anybody listening for the first time, Pat, what is sensorimotor psychotherapy in a nutshell?
It's a method of psychotherapy that really values the movement, posture, gesture, and physiological habits of the body as essential in our psychological health. So we're integrating how the body with emotions, with beliefs. I mean, when I learned psychotherapy, nobody talked about the body. It was never mentioned, in the back in the 70s. And um, but it really has a huge impact. And on attachment as well, because our bodies will literally shape themselves around our attachment relationships, both by mimicking how our attachment figures move and live in their bodies, and taking on in our bodies the messages that we get. Like if we're continually getting a message from our family, like children, children should be seen and not heard. That's probably really old fashioned, but I did hear that when I was a kid growing up in the 50s. There can be a, like, okay, you have to hold yourself back then, and so there can be a tightening and and after a while that becomes a chronic pattern. um, so you're working with a client who has that belief. My caregivers didn't want me to express myself. I had to hold myself back, and their body is doing that. How are we going to resolve that issue if their body continues to do this? We've got to work with the body so it can also expand. Yeah.
For sure. I've heard you say elsewhere as well, Pat, that what sensory motor psychotherapy helps people to do is it helps people to align their body with gravity and to be at peace with gravity. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, this is from my training that started in the 70s, but really I didn't complete that training until the 90s on postural integration and the Rolf method. I'm trained in I'm certified in the Rolf method, which is a form of body work developed by Dr. Ida Rolf, who looked at Kundalini blockages in the body and how that related to alignment. So she developed a method of hands-on body work. It's very systematic that will help a body, like if a body is, if this is a pattern of the body, Rolfing can get a body into this alignment. I'm sorry, I went out of view there. So I practiced Rolfing and postural integration from the 70s but what I found was that the changes didn't hold because the psychological issues that got the body out of alignment hadn't been addressed. So for me, yeah, that piece with gravity, I mean, our bodies are designed so that gravity can lift us up as well as hold us to the earth. But if our bodies, like if, even if the head's forward, gravity's pulling on my chin and taking me out of alignment. So it's really, yeah, I mean, for me, it's one of the big influences on my work. It's not just, I don't feel like I want to just use the body to help people connect with the body or to use the body to access unresolved issues. I want people to be able, through sensorimotor psychotherapy, to find that alignment and really live in the body in a different way, that's more expansive, there's more range of motion, and that goes with the freeing of the psyche as well. I mean, they can't be separated. It just can't be. The body and the mind, it can't be separated.
I uh I was I was preparing for this conversation yesterday on the public transport, like on a tram. I'm in Dublin at the moment, and on the way back, and one of the things that you talk about is that you can learn so much just by watching bodies, both our own but other people's. And I was looking around me and I was like, oh my God, like people hold themselves so differently. And whenever I see somebody, I'm making so many unconscious assumptions about that person just based on the way they're holding their body. There's so much information there, that we just take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love that you're saying that because that happens implicitly. We're not aware of it, but we will react to a person's physical presentation without even knowing. And in couples therapy, it's so wonderful to work with the body because that's what people are reacting to. The implicit meaning they're making from gesture and movement and expression that often is not accurate. And it's so fun for me to help couples get a sense of that. I was working just the other day with some an Orthodox Jewish group, and of course they're terrified right now. I mean, with everybody's in all the communities, there's so much fear, and um, they were sharing their experience with me, and somebody said, well, I'm watching your body language and you're like shrugging all the time, like you don't care. And I was so glad they brought it up because for me, it was that's like a helplessness. To me, that's like, oh, I just feel helpless. It didn't mean at all that I didn't care. But see, that goes on all the time and we don't question. Like you say, you're responding through your implicit meaning making. Yeah, so it's fascinating.
And could we say that the core aim of sensorimotor psychotherapy is to bring the implicit, the unconscious, to conscious awareness, so we can understand it and then we can help to change it?
Yeah, I think that's one intention for sure. I mean, Wilhelm Reich would say the body's the manifestation of the unconscious, what we're not aware of. And so, therefore, it becomes an incredibly potent tool in psychotherapy. Because, I mean, somebody comes in and they're talking about their childhood relationships or their attachment figures, and you notice they're starting to, the body's changing a little bit. And they're not even aware of it. And so you bring awareness to that and you start to explore it for its meaning, and it can take you that's where you can really get underneath the surface of the issues, because I think the body is the manifestation of the unconscious. I think Reich was correct about that.
I think it's just this perspective makes life so much more interesting. Like any social situation, any environment, like you can just have a look around you and you're just seeing the unconscious manifested in people's bodies around you, you know?
Oh yeah, it's so fascinating. It's so entertaining. My daughter and I were talking about this last night because when she and her twin brother were little, we used to go to Haagen-Dazs's ice cream store and sit at the window and we would watch people on the mall, and they would make up stories about what this person was feeling and thinking. And Ron Kurtz, my mentor, my best friend and mentor, we used to do the same thing, and it's so entertaining. You know, it's just and you learn so much. I tell students that's the best learning you could get with the body is just be curious, and it's free. I mean, you should have other training as well, but it's a wonderful learning to do that.
Definitely, definitely. Can you tell us about the core principles that inform sensory motor psychotherapy?
Yeah, I can, and I want to relate that to attachment because the principles that we aspire to in sensorimotor psychotherapy, they really define the relationship in in therapy. And Ron Kurtz used to talk about the missing experience, like the experience that's missing when you're growing up with your parents. And these principles implicitly convey the experience that we all always wanted to have. One of them, for example, is organicity. And these principles are really borrowed from Eastern and indigenous cultures. And, we apply them to our work, but they're not, they're not really Western ideas, honestly. I don't think. Um, Organicity, for example, has to do with trust in the intelligence of that individual. Like every living system has its own intelligence that you can't know. I can't know the right way for you, but deep inside you have that knowing. And this is where it relates to attachment, because if we just imagine growing up, and if our caregivers had that faith in us, I think most of us would have had a very different childhood if they just continually reinforce, what's right, go inside yourself. What do you want to study? What instrument do you want to play? It would be very different. Um, and if you believe in that inner intelligence, if you really believe in it, which challenges a lot of Western ideas about therapy. I mean, when I learned therapy when I was in my 20s, in the 70s, I was supposed to know what was best for my clients. It's nothing about help them find what's best for themselves. Um, and if you really can drop into that, uh, then there's no need to just push, which leads to the next principle of nonviolence. That if you trust that organicity, every living system is always there's always a movement towards growth, and towards evolution. And so with nonviolence, you find that direction that the system's already going in anyway, and you help them take that next step towards their own growth or healing or expansion. And that's really different from the therapy that I learned before I met Ron Kurtz, really different. Um, and so with nonviolence, you accept all parts of a person. Every part has a good intention, even though it might seem not. Um, so there are several principles. Those are two. Should I just go on and describe them all, or how?
Uh, well, we're talking here about attachment. You've also got unity, you've got mind, body, spirit, holism, you've got relational alchemy. I think this could be interesting if we're talking about attachment. Can you tell us about what that is?
Yeah, relational alchemy. It's our newest principle. I wanted a principle that could really describe uh, um, both the magic and the special connection that happens when two people get together. Like even us right now talking, I mean, I'm not going to have the same conversation with anybody because we're cueing off each other, and it's unique. And in therapy, there's unique growth, magical moments and healing that happens that's really special to that therapeutic relationship. Wouldn't happen in the same way in another therapy, and as therapists, I mean, those moments are just so incredible. But also in every relationship there are enactments and stuck places where the implicit selves really of therapist and client interact and just get stuck and can't resolve. And I mean, I learned that we should do our best not to get into those states, with clients, that oh, you should try to just have this acceptance and loving presence all the time with your clients. It's impossible because we're human. So the enactments that we get into are also just incredible opportunities for healing when we can negotiate them. So I wanted a term that would describe them both. And when I think of relational alchemy, it really describes the whole of the interaction, both the connection and the depth of healing, as well as the frustration and the stuck points. And it kind of relational alchemy values both of them as great avenues for healing. And that was a big learning for me. And I have my friend Philip Bromberg to thank for that. He's also passed away. When you get to be in your mid-70s, you've lost a lot of friends, and these people have had such an influence on me. They're no longer with us. But Philip really taught me about enactments, and he said they are not mistakes. They're supposed to happen. They're opportunities. You should cherish them, and he said that they provide the opportunity for growth for the therapist. He said as much as for the client, when we can stay with it and negotiate them relationally. So that's relational alchemy, that magic between people that holds both sides. Yeah.
I love the name relational alchemy. It's just there's something, yeah, I really like that. Could be its own sort of therapy in itself, I think, just the title. But anyway,
Yeah, it could, yeah.
are there any of those that you would say, of your principles, that would you say are like the most important? Like any that's like particularly fundamental? Maybe not. I just was curious to ask that.
No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. Every single one of them are essential. And in sensorimotor psychotherapy, these principles are the most important part of the work, and they really guide technique and intervention. And I think that's really important because, for example, mindfulness and presence is another principle that really reflects organicity, unity, nonviolence. So in a therapy session, if we want to help a person tap into their own inner wisdom, one of the most powerful ways to do that, as Ron used to say, he said, you help them go find the answers inside, like help them go inside deeply enough so that the right kind of information from within emerges, and then the system just will spontaneously reorganize. You don't have to push. And so we do that through mindfulness. Like if somebody's talking about a pain, the pain of their relationship with their mother or something, and how how the mother was always disappointed in them, or something like that. So we're not going to just talk about those memories. We're going to say, like, okay, so when you remember that disappointment or that early memory, what starts to happen inside? And they'll say, well, I start to collapse, I feel so sad. I want to turn away from people. And they're getting a different level of their own intelligence in terms of how they organized around that message that they got from their mother. And if you stay with that, and just help them go inside to that more deeply, it will it will shift. I'll tell you, it will shift. Yeah, the strong emotions will come, and then you have the opportunity in relational alchemy to really, sup support that and have that healing happen. Um,
This this idea that we have like an innate healing capacity within us. I think this is one of the most maybe interesting and important ideas in psychotherapy, and it seems that almost all of your principles sort of have are linked in there in some way, and they're all interconnected. You can't really separate them out, which is really interesting. Now, you've mentioned Ron Kurtz several times in this conversation, and in your weekend university talk, I think it was the talk you said that he was the one that introduced you to this idea of one of the most important things in our mental health is how we organize our experiences. So, what does this mean, Pat, and how does this link with, why is this important to understand when we're talking about attachment?
Because in working with people, we really, in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we really believe that change happens by discovering how we organize and shifting how we organize. And attachment relationships, that we learn how to organize our experience through our attachment relationships. I mean, even when we're babies, Beatrice Beebe and Ed Tronick, always writing about this, like that you can see the meaning a child is making by their movement sequences, a baby, long before they develop language. And those sequences, in response to the caregivers, they set a trajectory for the life. Not that it can't be changed, because we have experience over experience that can shift it, but you see it in babies. You see little babies that maybe, if they're frightened, they're hunching their shoulders in the presence of the attachment figure. If the attachment figure isn't like responsive to them when the baby reaches out, baby's going to stop reaching out. You know, you see that in Edtronic's tapes with the still face. When the parent gets the caregiver gets the still face, the baby tries and tries to get their attention, and then they just give up. And so this is how they organize around that experience, and it's coupled with emotions and beliefs that are not cognitive, of course, at that time. So when we're working with the organization of experience, we're working with these patterns of response that are really driving the content of our lives. Like a client comes in and talks about, I never get any support. Nobody's ever there for me. We're not going to talk about, well, can you call somebody up? Let's talk about this. No, we're going to go in to that part of them, how they organize around that belief of not getting support, the images, the emotions, the body. That's the organization of that's driving the content. I remember yeah, anyway, I can go on and on about this. I love talking about this.
No, go on. I want to hear what you're going to say there because and then I'll ask.
Well, because I'm thinking of one client who was abused by her father, sexually abused, and she had done a lot of work with it and resolved it on a trauma level. But then she's talking about how much she wants a relationship. She really wants, now she's ready. She wants a relationship. So we could have said, oh, great, let's join Match.com, let's blah, 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 let's get you out there. But what I said to her was, okay, so what happens when you think about a relationship? What goes on inside, especially in your body? And she tightened up, and she said she was so surprised, because that's the organization of experience. It was in conflict with what her mind wanted, But how can you get a relationship and every time you think about it, you're tightening up? So we had to address the part of her that was tightening up.
And then that begs the question, how do you address that part? What does that actually look like?
It looks like, okay, well, in sensorimotor psychotherapy, this is where the mindfulness comes in. We asked what happens when you think about right now, when you think about having a relationship, what happens inside? So that's a mindfulness question. You have to be in the here and now. What happens? Okay, I'm thinking about it. What's going on? Oh, my body's tightening up. Then you're home as a therapist. Then you go, okay, let's stay with this tightening. Let's find out more about it. So can you stay with it? Like what happens when you just stay with it? Well, I start feeling like I want to turn away. All right, so let's hang with that. Are there emotions that go with it? Yeah, I feel scared. Okay, so let's just stay with it, and memories start coming. Then the father comes back in. I can't remember what the session was now, but then yeah, my father's face is appearing again. So the presence of the past in this present moment that's not resolved. But that's the organization of experience that we wouldn't have gotten to if we just talked about, okay, let's try to help you, if we stayed with the content of wanting a relationship.
Wow. Okay. So I'm kind of going to fumble around with my understanding of this. You can keep me right and correct me, but are we sort of saying that the organization of experiences is how somebody unconsciously reacts to and interprets um incoming information, and then that then informs the content of their minds and their subsequent behavior. So it's this sort of internal process for how they are dealing with things.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and the organization of experience, I mean, it has to do with, body sensation, movement, like the tension is a movement, the emotion that goes with it, the images and sensory perceptions, and the thoughts. So these are the five, like what we call core organizers, or the building blocks of the organization of experience that we want to work with. And they're all, connected.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, something that you mentioned in the build up to this interview, Pat, was that, you know, whenever we're working with people clinically, we've all got implicit assumptions um about the work that we're doing that we might not even be aware of. And why is this important to understand? And how can someone become aware of their own implicit assumptions when they're doing this kind of work?
Well, I think there's a couple aspects of that. Uh, I'm thinking where to start. Um, I mean, when you're doing the work, this is really a difference between mindfulness and presence. Like mindfulness is a dual state of consciousness. And somebody asked me once when they were showing a videotape at a conference, they said, "You must be so mindful when you're working." And I'm like, I mean, I don't think I'm mindful at all, hardly ever when I'm working. I'm present. I'm there with the client, and things kind of come through, and we're in this little bubble together, but it's a more of a unified state of consciousness. I'm not observing my body. Oh yeah, my shoulder's moving forward. I'm starting to feel a little frustrated. I'm not, that's mindfulness. I'm not, I'm not there unless the session gets stuck, or we're pausing. And uh, um because if you're too mindful in a session, like if you're too much wanting to discover your implicit beliefs in the session, you're going to ruin that dyadic dance. And I would say, yeah, of course, we all, if we're curious, we want to know about our implicit assumptions. We want to bring them to consciousness. Body's a great way to find out about it, your own patterns and all. But at the same time, with faith in relational alchemy, uh, we know our implicit selves is going to interlock with the clients, and we're going to get frustrated, but we're going to trust that, and we're going to trust that we have the courage and the presence to stay with it and resolve it with the client, So I don't want to, emphasize that we have to really know our implicit assumptions and all to be a therapist, because one, we never will, and two, it can ruin the relationship if that's what you're really focusing on. It can ruin the dance. It almost implies that we wouldn't have faith in relational alchemy, you know. And um I think, I think it was Les Greenberg who said, therapy can't begin without safety, but it can't end without the disruption and repair. And in a way, what he's saying, it can't end without the enactment where the childhood issues of both parties come right there in the therapy hour and you resolve it together in a real relationship. And this happened with my own therapist, let alone with all the clients I've worked with. So I think it's really, we undervalue the power of the implicit selves interacting and then resolving that relationally. I don't know if all that makes sense, but I think sometimes therapists put so much pressure on themselves to really, oh, I have to almost be perfect and know all my own issues before I can work, and it's not true.
Interesting. I know that does make sense, and I have never heard anybody make the distinction, which is kind of shocking. I've never heard anybody make the distinction between presence and mindfulness before, but that totally makes sense. With mindfulness, there's a bit of a separation from the content of your experience, whereas presence, you're just fully there, attuned and in the moment, and that's a totally different thing.
Yeah. No, I hadn't made that separation either until that person said, "Oh, you must be so mindful." And I'm like, I'm not. And then I started thinking about it's kind of on a continuum. With presence, you're just fully there. Like a lot of our interaction, I just feel present with you. I'm not like noticing my gesture, I'm just here. And that's a very a wonderful experience to just be present and in it and let things flow. Uh, so all the talk of mindfulness is great, but um, I don't want to be mindful all the time.
Definitely, definitely. Um, so something else, Pat, which is I think really you mentioned it briefly earlier about reaching out, and uh, if a client comes to you with loneliness problems, I've heard you say that you might actually see how they reach out. What might that tell you about the problem? And yeah, why work in this way? Why look at how someone would reach out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, John Bowlby taught us about proximity seeking actions, and how we're basically, those are innate in our systems, and reaching out. I mean, babies will reach out. It's like what we were talking about before. Babies just reach for their caregivers, and how the caregivers respond to the baby starts to influence the way in which they reach. So, I mean, when I ask a client to reach out, it's so fascinating. Like clients will reach out like this. I had one client go, "Well, I want to reach out," but her shoulders hiked up in fear. Another one reached out halfway and said, "Well, there wouldn't be anybody there." Another reached out palm down like this and said, "Why would I reach out? Nobody's gonna, support me." So you get that right away. You get their whole attachment history in the pattern, not the content. You see, that's the in the like all our experiences, have led us right to this moment. And so we want to work with the cumulative effect of that, of all that experience, with the pattern, instead of the content. So then you gotta, then you're, as soon as you explore proximity seeking actions, you've got the root of the attachment imprints. Right.
So the pattern reveals the accumulation of all of these different experiences. That's like the manifestation of all of these built up experiences over the years. So there's so much information contained within that.
Oh yeah. There's so much. I mean, if you think of it like how our whole history has shaped us right to where we are now. We can take any individual memory or whatever and work with that memory, but with the organizational experience, we're working with the effect of all those experiences on our own organization right now. Like, so it doesn't matter about the content. Ron used to say, I don't need to hear any content. He said clients like to tell, so we listen, but you don't need it. You got the body. You've got the manifestation of the unconscious right there in the body.
Wow. We uh we did a course on attachment theory and psychotherapy from a guy called Jeremy Holmes, and one of the things he talked about in that course was that I think it was Mary Main doing the adult attachment reviews. Big thing that she learned from doing that was like the best way to sort of understand what somebody's attachment patterns were or attachment style was not to look at what the content of what they were writing, but it was the way they expressed themselves. People that were securely attached were very expressive and would give loads of detail, loads of rich imagery and things. People that were insecurely attached would be very curt, very to the point, and just whatever. And I just thought that there's some parallels there too.
Yeah, there are. Absolutely.
Um, so for clinicians listening to this, how would you say that sensory motor psychotherapy can actually no, what I want to ask here is how does our attachment pattern or our attachment styles affect how we regulate and how we organize our experiences? So how might someone that is securely attached regulate their emotions compared with someone who has more insecure and maybe avoidant or anxious attachment patterns?
Well, I mean, a simple, oversimplified way of thinking about it, in my mind, is that um, a securely attached person can use both interactive regulation with another person and self-regulation. So, if I'm securely attached and I'm upset, something's dysregulated me. I watched the news or something, I can be with a friend or my partner and they can comfort me and I can take that in. Or if nobody's around, I can also, make myself a cup of tea, calm myself down by myself. Whereas an ambivalently attached person or preoccupied, with that pattern, tends to not be able to use self-regulation. They use more interactive. They got to have somebody else to regulate, and they maximize the internal distress and need regulation. Whereas an avoidantly somebody with an avoidant pattern is more inclined to not turn to relationships at all, but just, try to monitor, try to regulate yourself. I mean, so that's one way to look at it. It's a little oversimplified, but I think it can be helpful in terms of regulation.
And as part of the therapy, would it be right in saying that you help people that might have these insecure patterns expand the repertoire of how they can regulate their emotions by seeking out relationships with other people and things like this?
Yeah, I mean, we do work a lot with somatic capacities that can support both interactive regulation or co-regulation with others and auto-regulation with just yourself. So we teach people how to calm themselves down, how to find resources that they can use on their own. But then also we work with interactive resources like reaching, like making eye contact, like having boundaries, Um, and yeah, like I remember one client who she was pretty avoidant, and she felt like if she had contact, that it wouldn't be good for her because she'd be ignored or worse. And so the gesture was because when she reached out, she didn't want to reach out, So her gesture was both to have the scoot back a little more, to have a reach and a push. And this in her body, she could feel safe in relationship. Whereas if she just had the reach, she didn't. And if she just had the push, of course, she just pushed everybody away. So just exploring actions. So for her, this action supported interactive or co-regulation, right?
Wow. That's mind blowing. Okay, so just a couple of questions to wrap up here now, Pat. First is when you were speaking earlier about working in that hospital as a technician and then doing all of these different teaching the yoga and all the different classes you were running, the thought that jumped in my mind was like, someone's going to make a movie about this someday. Like they really are, where that led to, no, really. And what I wanted to ask is, given the contribution you've made to the field and everything, like what legacy do you want to leave? Like what do you want the world to see differently because of your work and the all of the time and energy that you've invested in this?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I think one, I when people when they see this work, like the videotapes and all of this work, I think many people have an immediate resonance with it because of the principles. They don't know that, but that is the bottom line of why people are drawn to this work, it's because we demonstrate that organicity, that nonviolence, that the relational alchemy, the mindfulness and presence, mind, body, spirit, holism, unity, and that creates the context or the atmosphere in which therapy happens. And I think that's what people are drawn to. I mean, they say things like this is my work. I just know it. I don't know why, but um, so I think the principles are life changing. They have been for me. But I mean, and I also hope that the principles will have a really real impact, like that folks will have faith in their own organicity and their own evolution and being nonviolent with themselves and others and all. So and then within that is valuing the body.
Have you thought about writing a book just exploring those principles in more depth and really putting that out there?
Yeah, I have. I have a chapter in my last book on the principles, and I was thinking the other day that in some ways I wished I'd just made that a separate book and expanded on it. I don't know if Norton will let me do that now, but it was a long chapter, and I thought, yeah, it would have been nice to just make that a smaller book just on this, because this is the most important part of the work, and then how these principles really influence everything you do in therapy. And I mean, for me, they're my guiding lights in my life, and they're aspirational. You never arrive, but they're aspirational.
For sure, for sure. All right, so just one to wrap up now. Is there any one practice you'd recommend that somebody listening to this can do from sensory motor psychotherapy that if they adopted, it could really improve their quality of life?
See, this is a tough thing because there's never any one size fits all. Um, oh, I think if there is one thing I would say, see if you can develop a real curiosity about your own body and its movements, and let your body itself teach you. You know, like we just bring your own attention to your body and notice how you move, notice how you are with different people, and notice what makes your body feel calmer, what gets you excited, what gets you dysregulated, and how your body responds. And I think if you just get curious, your bodies can teach you so much. I mean, the body is wiser than anything. I mean, when you think about our brains and bodies, nobody understands the intelligence there. And just we have that. So that can be your own laboratory for discovery.
So that's a great note to end on. Get really curious about your own body, and I would say also to get curious about the bodies of others too. It just can make a day a bit more interesting as well.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, Pat, we'll let you go. Before you do, where can people learn more about sensory motor psychotherapy training online? And you've published a few books, Sensory Motor Psychotherapy in Context, and a few others. You want to tell us about those too?
Sure. Well, you can go to our website, sensorimotor.org, and there's free webinars on there as well as probably some paid ones. I haven't looked at it for a while. But you can go to all our upcoming trainings, watch webinars, go to the resources. And the books, 2006 was Trauma in the Body, written with Kikuni Minton and Claire Payne. That's basic theory and practice. I think it was 2015, Janina Fisher and I put out a book called Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, Interventions for Trauma and Attachment, that has a bunch of worksheets in them that people seem to find really valuable. I would have written them much more simpler if I had that book to do over. And then the last book, I think it was published in 2021, I think, or 2020. It's Sensorimotor Psychotherapy in Context, and it's bringing, our first kind of attempt bringing an anti-racist, anti-oppression lens to therapy. It's called the Pocket Guide, which it's not a pocket guide; it's a book. So don't let the title deceive you. But Norton put out this whole series of pocket guides, and but it's a book. It's not a pocket. It will not definitely fit in your pocket.
Yeah, when I was reading, I was like, this is not a pocket guide at all. This is a book. Yeah, well, Pat, thank you so much. I always feel we're speaking about relational alchemy. I always feel a great deal amount of relational alchemy in these conversations, and every time I learn a lot. Like I'm always surprised by how much I learn from these conversations. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Niall. So thank you.
I wish you the best going forward. All right. Thanks, Pat.
Bye.